marriage here is a covenant. It's not just a contract. Marriage is a covenant. You see, contracts and covenants are different. We in our world understand contracts. We really don't understand covenants. But in the Bible, in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, they would enter into covenants, not contracts, because covenants were more binding. When two people entered into a covenant relationship, they were entering into a relationship that couldn't be broken. Okay? And we see that. And we know in the Old Testament, kings would enter into covenants with each other. The nations would covenant together. Sometimes individuals would enter into covenants. God entered into a covenant with the people of Israel. And in any covenant, the formula is basically the same for a covenant relationship. First, the terms are spelled out. If two nations were going into a covenant, the king would say, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to do this. You're going to do that. Right? The terms were spelled out. And you'd say, well, that's also in a contract. But in a contract, we write contracts today where we're going to do this, but there's all kind of clauses within that contract that give me an eject button, that give me a way out. If you don't live up to your end, I'm free from my obligation. That's not a covenant. A covenant is, I'm entering into this with you. I'm doing my part regardless of whether you do your part. That's a covenant. So the terms were laid out. Okay? Then when the terms were laid out, they would sacrifice. It was a blood and flesh sacrifice. Generally, an animal was sacrificed, the blood was shed, the sacrifice was made, and then they would consume the sacrifice. They would eat it all together. In consummation, a sealing of the covenant. Okay? A seal, S-E-A-L. A sealing, they were sealing the covenant and consuming the sacrifice. That was the general formula for a covenant, whether it's two nations, whether it's two people. That's what God did with the nation of Israel. That's part of why the animal sacrificial system came into being. It's a foreshadowing of Jesus, but God did not call Israel his people until after the covenant was established. The animal sacrifices, which pointed to Jesus. Now come along, Jesus. Now folks, this is so very important. Hang with me in this because this is the depth of sex. You're going to say, well, sex is just physical. No. If you get this, then you understand why. Not before marriage, not outside of marriage, between a husband and a wife, man and woman in general, but a husband and wife specific. You understand why? Because it's destructive and why it train wrecks outside of this. Because in that covenant, if you fast forward to Jesus Christ, God made a new covenant with his people, you and I. And how did that covenant, he laid out the covenant terms and listen, what did he do? He offered a flesh and blood sacrifice, Jesus Christ, his own son. Jesus was murdered, betrayed, perfect life, murdered on the cross. His blood was spilled. The flesh and blood sacrifice. And that is consummated when we surrender everything we have, when we're consumed by him and he's consumed by us and our souls are united with him. That's the new covenant. It is ratified in faith. It is ratified. It is spelled out. The sacrifice is made and it is ratified when we're consumed with Jesus and he is consumed with us and our hearts leap for his glory and that's what we live for. That's the ratification of the covenant. Now, let me help you to understand that is what God created sex to represent. And you're like, wow, what? I mean, mind blown. I just thought it was just about having fun or making babies. And no, it's about something so much deeper. Oh, it's incredibly fun, right? It's how babies come into the world, but it's about something so much deeper than this. You see, when a man and woman get married, when you stand before a pastor, and listen, America is one of the few countries in the world to where standing before a pastor fulfills the legal obligation, because in most countries, even in most Western European countries, right? You don't go to a pastor. If our pastor at LifePoint in Brussels, in some of our campuses, marry you, it has to be a legal union. You go do that just for your spiritual or religious purposes, but it has to be a legal thing that's binding by the government, right? And so that's what happens in most of the world. America, like the fact that I can do it and it serves, it's legal, it's also spiritual. Man, that's incredible, because what happens is when a man and woman, biblically, when a man and woman get married, they stand before a pastor here, a Christian marriage. In a Christian marriage, we stand before a pastor and we lay out the covenant terms. We're making a covenant with each other before God. We're involved, God's involved in this covenant. If you're a Christian and you got married, not at the court of the, not at the justice of the peace, you had a Christian marriage, then what happens is now don't get me wrong, the justice of the peace, you're married, okay? Biblically. Okay, but what I'm saying is you enter into a Christian marriage, you are standing before a God, you're laying out the covenant terms, you're making covenant vows for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, yada, 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 whatever vows. You might have made your own vows that talked about, oh man, all this stuff that was cheesy in some ways and beautiful in another. Right? But you're making all these covenant vows, you're laying out the covenant terms, and what happens is you're making a vow to each other before God, and then God designs sex. That's how you consummate those vows. Sex is a deeper reality. It is a spiritual symbol of a physical act. It is a deeper reality. So God designed sex to be, it's something supernatural and it's holy. God is knitting your souls together. It's not just about making babies. It seals the covenant that you make with each other before God at the altar. And then every time a husband and wife has sex after that, you're reminding each other. It's a reminder of the covenant vows you made. Now, whoa, that's a little bit deeper. What I've just spelled out is a little bit deeper than just having babies or even just having just pleasure. And it is all those. But it's a little bit deeper. That's why it's not hedonistic. That's why it's not anytime, any place, anyone, anytime, anywhere. That's why it's one man, one woman. Not before, not after marriage with anyone else. One man, one woman, because you're consummating the covenant and then you're reminding each other of the covenant over and over and over that keeps you pure and it keeps you holy. That's what sex is designed to do. That's what sex is designed to do. Sex is so pure and good that every time you have sex, it should be a worship experience, a spiritual experience. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you that if sex is never a spiritual worship experience for you, and hopefully I'm helping you understand a deeper reality today that will help you understand when with your husband and your wife you're having sex, then it should lead to a spiritual worship experience because of what it represents. If it doesn't, you're missing out. If you've never connected those two, man, you're missing out on the best sex of your life. I promise you. It should be a worship experience. The best sex you'll ever have isn't something you read about, folks. It's not something you hear about. It's when you connect the physical act of sex with the spiritual reality of what it's intended to represent. Anything else is a cheap knockoff.